The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Rebecca Martinez pulled another dusty box from the storage shelf. Just another Tuesday morning at Fort Davidson Supply Depot. She'd been doing inventory for 3 months now, counting ammunition, cataloging equipment, checking serial numbers. Nothing exciting ever happened in Building 47. But when Major Harrison walked in that morning, something felt different. His eyes weren't scanning the shelves like usual. They were watching her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca had always been meticulous about her work. Growing up in Phoenix with a father who ran a small auto repair shop, she'd learned early that details mattered. Every bolt, every part number, every invoice had to be perfect. That attention to detail is what got her the civilian contractor position at Fort Davidson in the first place. The military supply depot wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well and offered stability that her previous jobs at retail chains never provided. Plus, there was something oddly satisfying about bringing order to the chaos of military surplus. Boxes that had been sitting untouched for years, equipment with serial numbers worn nearly smooth, obsolete gear that somehow never got properly disposed of. Building 47 housed what the Army called miscellaneous equipment storage. Translation, stuff they weren't sure what to do with but couldn't throw away due to regulations. Rebecca's job was to create a comprehensive digital inventory of everything. Photograph each item, record serial numbers, note conditions, and assign proper storage codes. She'd started in Section A 3 months ago, working her way through boxes of Cold War-era radio equipment. Section B held Vietnam-era field gear. Now she was in Section C, which seemed to be a mixed bag of items from various decades, all jumbled together without any apparent organization system. The morning had started like any other. Rebecca arrived at 7:30 a.m. sharp, badged in through the security checkpoint, and made her way to her workstation in the back corner of the warehouse. She'd set up a systematic approach. Pull a box, photograph its contents, log each item in her tablet, then move to the next one. Slow and steady. Box 1247-C contained old field manuals from the 1980s. Box 1248-C held outdated communications equipment. Box 1249-C was full of uniform accessories, belt buckles, insignia, name tapes, standard stuff. But Box 1250-C was different. The cardboard was older, more weathered than the others. The military designation stamp was faded, and someone had written additional numbers in pencil along the side, numbers that didn't match the warehouse's coding system. When Rebecca lifted the lid, she found it wasn't packed like the other boxes either. Instead of being stuffed full of random items, this box had been carefully organized with individual wrapped bundles. She unwrapped the first bundle and found a collection of military patches, unit insignia from various divisions. Normal enough. The second bundle contained medals and ribbons, most of which she recognized from her months of cataloging similar items. The third bundle, however, made her pause. Wrapped in what appeared to be an old handkerchief was a single badge. It was heavier than the typical cloth patches, made of metal with intricate detailing. The design showed an eagle with outstretched wings, clutching arrows and an olive branch. Below it was a shield with stars and stripes, and around the border were the words Presidential Security Detail. Rebecca had never seen anything like it before. She'd cataloged hundreds of military insignia over the past months, infantry divisions, airborne units, special forces patches, but nothing related to presidential security. She turned the badge over and found an engraved number on the back, PSD-084. She was photographing the badge when she heard footsteps approaching her workstation. Major Harrison appeared around the corner, his usual morning coffee in hand. "How's the inventory coming along, Martinez?" he asked. But his tone was different from their previous casual interactions, more formal. His eyes moved to the box she was working on, then to the badge in her hands. "Good morning, sir," Rebecca replied, setting down her camera. "Making steady progress through Section C. This box has some interesting items. Looks like someone's personal collection got mixed in with the standard supplies. Major Harrison stepped closer, and Rebecca noticed his jaw tighten slightly when he saw the presidential badge. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Concern? She couldn't quite read it. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, extending his hand. Rebecca handed over the badge, watching as Harrison examined it closely. He turned it over, saw the engraved number, and his expression became unreadable. "Where exactly did you find this?" His voice had an edge to it now. "Box 1250-C, third bundle down. It was wrapped separately from the other items." Rebecca gestured to the open box. "Should I log it with the other insignia, or does something like this need special handling?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the badge. Rebecca had worked with military personnel long enough to recognize when someone was thinking through a problem, weighing options. "You haven't logged this yet?" he asked finally. "Not yet. I was photographing it when you arrived." "Good." Harrison slipped the badge into his uniform pocket. "I'm going to need you to hold off on cataloging this particular box for now. There might be some classification issues with these items." Rebecca felt a chill of unease. Classification issues? She was cleared for the inventory work, had gone through all the proper background checks. What kind of classification problems could a box of old patches and medals possibly have? "Sir, I don't understand. My clearance level should be sufficient for standard inventory work." "I'm sure it is," Harrison said, but he was already reaching for box 1250-C. "Just a precaution. Sometimes personal effects get mixed in with official equipment, and we need to sort out what belongs where." He lifted the box from her workstation. "Continue with the other boxes in this section. I'll handle this one personally." As Major Harrison walked away with the box, Rebecca stood there feeling like she'd stumbled into something much bigger than a simple inventory discrepancy. The way he'd reacted to that badge, the immediate recognition, the quick decision to confiscate the entire box, suggested this wasn't about paperwork or proper filing procedures. She tried to refocus on her work, pulling box 1251-C from the shelf, but her mind kept returning to that presidential security badge. PSD 0847. The number was etched clearly in her memory now. What was a badge from a presidential security detail doing in a forgotten storage box at Fort Davidson? And why had Major Harrison seemed so concerned about her finding it? The rest of the morning passed slowly. Rebecca mechanically worked through 3 more boxes, but her usual attention to detail was compromised. She kept glancing toward the warehouse entrance, half expecting Harrison to return with explanations or instructions. But the Major never came back. During her lunch break, Rebecca found herself thinking about the other items in that box. She'd only gotten through the first 3 bundles before Harrison arrived. What else might have been wrapped up in there? More badges? Documents? Something that would explain why a presidential security detail insignia ended up in military surplus storage. The logical part of her mind insisted she should just drop it. Harrison was her superior, and if he said there were classification issues, that should be the end of it. But the methodical part of her, the part that had been trained to question discrepancies and investigate inconsistencies, couldn't let it go. By the time she returned from lunch, Rebecca had made a decision. She was going to do some research. That afternoon, Rebecca approached her research with the same systematic method she used for inventory. She started with what she knew. Presidential Security Detail Badge, number PSD 0847, found in box 1250-C, alongside other military insignia and medals. Her first stop was the base library's computer terminals. Fort Davidson had a small but well-equipped research facility that contractors could access during off-hours. Rebecca logged in and began searching for information about presidential security units. The Secret Service was the obvious answer for modern presidential protection, but the badge she'd found looked older, more military in design than the typical Secret Service insignia she'd seen in photos. She dug deeper, searching for historical information about military units assigned to presidential security. What she found surprised her. Before the Secret Service took over full responsibility for presidential protection in 1901, various military units had been assigned to guard duties. During World War II and the early Cold War, special military detachments often provided additional security for presidential travel and events. These units operated under different names and organizational structures, depending on the era and specific threats. But nowhere in her research could she find any reference to a presidential security detail with the specific insignia design she'd seen. The military units she read about had different badges, different numbering systems. PSD 0847 didn't appear in any official records she could access. Rebecca's next step was checking Fort Davidson's own historical records. The base had been established in 1943 and had served various functions over the decades: training facility, logistics hub, equipment depot. Maybe there was some connection between the base and presidential security operations that would explain how the badge ended up in storage. The base archives were stored in the basement of the administrative building. Rebecca had never been down there before, but her contractor access card worked on the door. The room was dimly lit, with rows of filing cabinets and storage boxes stretching from floor to ceiling. A single desk with an old computer terminal sat in the center. She started with the obvious searches: presidential, security, protection, but found nothing relevant in the digital catalog. The paper files were organized by decade, so she pulled folders from the 1960s through the 1980s, looking for any mention of special assignments or unusual units. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Most of what she found was routine: training schedules, personnel transfers, equipment requisitions. But in a folder marked Special Operations 1979, she discovered something interesting: a memo about a classified unit being temporarily stationed at Fort Davidson. The memo was heavily redacted, with black lines covering most of the text. But she could make out fragments: presidential visit, enhanced security protocols, temporary assignment of specialized personnel, classification level maintained. The date on the memo was October 1979. Rebecca made a note and continued searching. In another folder from the same period, she found an equipment requisition form that wasn't redacted. It requested accommodation and logistics support for 12 personnel, special assignment, duration estimated 2 to 3 weeks. The requesting unit was listed as PSD Operations Group. PSD, Presidential Security Detail. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. She was onto something real. She photographed both documents with her phone, then continued searching through the remaining files from 1979. In November's folder, she found a shipping manifest that made her stop breathing for a moment. It listed various items being transferred out of Fort Davidson after what it termed conclusion of special assignment. Most of the items were standard military equipment, but at the bottom of the list she saw personal effects unclaimed stored pending further disposition. The manifest was signed by Major William Patterson, Base Operations Officer. Rebecca searched through more recent folders, looking for any follow-up on those unclaimed personal effects. In the 1980s files, she found a series of memos about storage consolidation projects. Old equipment and unclaimed items were being moved to different warehouses, reorganized, reboxed. Building 47 was mentioned several times as a destination for miscellaneous items pending final disposition. The trail went cold after that, but Rebecca had enough pieces to construct a theory. In 1979, a presidential security detail had been temporarily stationed at Fort Davidson, probably for some kind of presidential visit or event. When they left, someone's personal effects got left behind, including that badge. Over the years, as the base went through various reorganizations, the items got shuffled around until they ended up in Box 1250-C, forgotten in the depths of Building 47's storage. But that didn't explain Major Harrison's reaction. If it was just a forgotten piece of military memorabilia, why had he been so concerned about her finding it? Why confiscate the entire box? Rebecca was pondering these questions when she heard footsteps on the stairs leading down to the archives. She quickly closed the folders she'd been examining and tried to look casual, but her heart was racing. The footsteps belonged to Sergeant Davis from base security, a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes who'd always been friendly to Rebecca during her months at Fort Davidson. "Workin' late, Martinez?" Davis asked, but her tone was curious rather than suspicious. "Just doing some research on base history," Rebecca replied, which was technically true. "I've been cataloging a lot of old equipment, and I got curious about where some of it came from." Davis nodded approvingly. "Good to see someone taking an interest in the base's history. Most people just do their jobs and go home." She gestured around the archives. "There's a lot of stories buried down here. Fort Davidson's seen some interesting times over the years." "Really? Like what?" Davis glanced around, as if checking to make sure they were alone. "Well, nothing I should probably talk about officially. But back in the late 70s, we had some VIP visits that kept everyone on high alert. Secret Service, military security units, the whole 9 yards. Never did find out exactly who was coming or what it was all about. That was above my pay grade back then." Rebecca tried to keep her expression neutral. "That sounds exciting. Do you remember what year that was?" "Had to be 1979, maybe early 1980. I was just a young MP then, but I remember the extra security protocols, the restricted areas. And there were these guys in suits who weren't quite Secret Service but weren't regular military either. They kept to themselves mostly, had their own quarters, their own equipment. What happened to them?" "They left as quickly as they came. One day they were there, the next day they were gone. Left behind some equipment, some personal stuff. I remember there was talk about what to do with it all, but then other things came up and everyone forgot about it." Davis paused, studying Rebecca's face. Why the sudden interest in ancient history? Rebecca decided to take a calculated risk. "I found some old military insignia today that Major Harrison thought might have classification issues. Got me wondering about the base's history with special operations." Something shifted in Davis's expression, not suspicious, but understanding. "Ah, you stumbled onto something that stirred up old memories. Is that a problem?" Davis was quiet for a moment, then sat down on the edge of the desk. "Look, Martinez, you seem like good people. You do your job well, you don't cause trouble. But sometimes in this business, it's better to not ask too many questions about things that happened before your time. Even if those things are just sitting in storage boxes. Especially then." Davis stood up. "Whatever you found today, whatever Harrison told you about it, that's probably where it should stay. Some stones are better left unturned." Davis headed for the stairs, then paused. "But if you do decide to keep digging, be careful who you talk to about it. Not everyone at this base has your best interests at heart." After Davis left, Rebecca sat alone in the archives, processing what she'd learned. The sergeant had essentially confirmed her theory about the 1979 presidential security detail. But her warning about being careful suggested there was more to the story than just forgotten military memorabilia. Rebecca made copies of the relevant. Rebecca spent the weekend researching from her apartment, using her personal laptop and carefully avoiding any direct searches that might trigger monitoring. She'd signed the NDA, but Coleman hadn't specifically forbidden her from learning about general presidential history or public records from 1979. She started with newspaper archives from October and November 1979, searching for any mention of presidential travel or security incidents. The period was turbulent. The Iranian hostage crisis had begun in November, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was imminent, and President Carter was dealing with multiple international crises. In the Denver Post archives, she found a brief mention that caught her attention. President Carter's undisclosed security briefing locations draw criticism from transparency advocates. The article was dated October 28, 1979, and mentioned that the administration had been conducting high-level security meetings at undisclosed military facilities rather than traditional government buildings. Rebecca's pulse quickened. Fort Davidson was located in Colorado, about 2 hours from Denver. Could the president have visited the base for security briefings during that chaotic period? She expanded her search to include other Colorado newspapers from the same time frame. In the Colorado Springs Gazette, she found another small article. Increased military activity reported at several state installations amid heightened security concerns. The article didn't name specific bases, but it was dated October 25, 1979, just 3 days before the Denver Post article. The pieces were starting to form a picture. In late October 1979, during a period of international crisis, President Carter had apparently conducted security meetings at undisclosed military locations in Colorado. The timing matched perfectly with the Fort Davidson documents she'd found. But Rebecca needed more than circumstantial evidence. She needed to identify the actual members of the presidential security detail that had been stationed at Fort Davidson. The badge number PSD-0847 was her only concrete lead. On Monday morning, Rebecca returned to work with a new strategy. Instead of searching for information about the presidential detail directly, she would focus on identifying military personnel who had been at Fort Davidson in 1979 but weren't part of the regular base roster. The base personnel records from 1979 were stored in a different section of the archives, and accessing them would require authorization she didn't have. But Rebecca had noticed something during her previous research. The equipment requisition forms often included names of personnel responsible for specific requests. During her lunch break, she returned to the archives and pulled the folders from late 1979 again. This time, she focused on the signatures and authorization stamps on various documents. Most were signed by regular base personnel, but a few had unfamiliar names. One requisition form for specialized communications equipment was signed by someone named J. Brennan with a notation that he was TDY, temporary duty. Another form requesting additional quarters preparation was authorized by M. Rodriguez, also marked as temporary duty. Rebecca photographed these documents, then searched through more files looking for other TDY personnel from the same time period. She found 3 more names: K. Thompson, D. Sullivan, and R. Chen. All of them had signed various forms related to equipment, accommodations, or logistics during October and November 1979. 5 temporary duty personnel matching the time frame of the presidential security detail. Rebecca felt she was getting closer to the truth. That afternoon, she decided to take another calculated risk. She approached Sergeant Davis during a routine security check in Building 47. "Sergeant Davis, you mentioned the other day that there were some special security personnel here in 1979. Do you remember any of their names?" Davis paused in her clipboard review and gave Rebecca a sharp look. "Thought you were going to leave that ancient history alone?" "I'm just curious. You said they kept to themselves, but someone must have interacted with them." Davis glanced around to make sure they were alone, then moved closer to Rebecca's workstation. "Why are you really asking about this?" Rebecca decided partial honesty was her best approach. "I found some documents in the archives that mention temporary duty personnel from that period. I'm trying to understand what kind of operation would require that level of security." "Documents like what?" "Personnel requisitions, equipment requests, names like Brennan, Rodriguez, Thompson." Davis's expression changed immediately. The casual friendliness disappeared, replaced by something much more serious. "Where exactly did you find those names?" "In the archives, in the 1979 files. They were signed on various requisition forms." Davis was quiet for a long moment, staring at Rebecca with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Martinez, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to give me an honest answer. Has anyone else seen those documents?" "No, just me." "And you haven't shared those names with anyone?" "No." Davis seemed to be weighing something in her mind. Finally, she pulled out her radio and spoke quietly into it. "This is Davis in Building 47. I need to speak with Major Harrison immediately. Priority 1. Rebecca felt a chill of panic. "Sergeant, I didn't mean to." "Quiet." Davis held up her hand. "Don't say another word until Harrison gets here." 10 minutes later, Major Harrison arrived with 2 MPs Rebecca didn't recognize. His expression was grim as he approached her workstation. "Martinez, I need you to come with me. Bring your personal belongings." "Sir, I don't understand what I've done wrong." "We'll discuss it in my office." The walk to Harrison's office felt like a death march. Rebecca's mind raced through the possible consequences of her research. Had she violated the NDA by looking at personnel records? Would they press charges? Fire her? Worse? Harrison's office was in the base administration building, a stark room with military-issue furniture and American flags. He gestured for Rebecca to sit in the chair across from his desk, while the two MPs positioned themselves by the door. "Ms. Martinez, Sergeant Davis reported that you've been conducting unauthorized research into classified personnel records. Is this correct?" My mouth felt dry. "I've been looking at archival documents that were available through normal access procedures. I didn't realize any of them were classified." "The documents themselves aren't classified," Harrison said, "but the information you're attempting to piece together from those documents is highly sensitive." He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out photographs, the same documents Rebecca had photographed with her phone. Her heart sank as she realized they'd been monitoring her activities more closely than she'd thought. "The names you've identified, Brennan, Rodriguez, Thompson, Sullivan, Chen, these individuals were part of a special security operation that remains classified to this day. Your research into their identities constitutes a potential breach of national security." "I was just trying to understand what I'd found," Rebecca protested. "If these records are so sensitive, why are they accessible in the public archives?" "Because 40 years ago, no one anticipated that someone would be methodical enough to piece together fragments of information from multiple sources and identify operational personnel." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Miss Martinez, you've put me in a very difficult position. Your research has uncovered information that certain parties would prefer to remain buried. The question now is what we do about it." One of the MPs stepped forward and handed Harrison a sealed envelope. He opened it, read the contents, and his expression darkened. "It seems the decision has been made for us," he said grimly. "Miss Martinez, you're being transferred to a secure facility for debriefing. This is for your own protection as much as for national security." "What kind of debriefing? For how long?" "That depends on what you can tell us about your research methods, what conclusions you've drawn, and whether you've shared any information with outside parties." Rebecca felt trapped. "I signed the NDA. I haven't told anyone anything." "The NDA covered the badge you found. It didn't cover the historical research you've been conducting since then." Harrison stood up and nodded to the MPs. "Escort Miss Martinez to Building 12. She'll be staying there until further notice." As the MPs moved toward her, Rebecca made one last desperate attempt to understand what was happening. "Major, please, what is it about these 5 people that's worth all this secrecy? They were just security personnel doing their jobs 40 years ago." Harrison paused at the door. "Miss Martinez, those 5 people weren't just security personnel. They were witnesses to something that officially never happened. And one of them, the one who owned badge PSD-0847, saw something that certain powerful people have spent decades making sure stays hidden." Building 12 turned out to be a small detention facility on the edge of Fort Davidson. Rebecca's room was essentially a holding cell with a cot, a small desk, and a barred window that looked out onto Empley Prairie. The MPs confiscated her phone, her personal belongings, and even her shoes, apparently to prevent her from attempting to leave. For the first few hours, Rebecca alternated between panic and anger. She was an American citizen being held without charges, without access to a lawyer, without even a phone call. The whole situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie rather than real life. But as the initial shock wore off, her methodical mind began working on the problem. Harrison had revealed more information than he probably intended. The 5 personnel she'd identified weren't just random security guards. They were witnesses to something that officially never happened. And whoever had owned the badge PSD-0847 had seen something significant enough to justify decades of secrecy. Rebecca began reconstructing everything she knew about the October 1979 presidential security operation. President Carter was dealing with multiple international crises. He was conducting security briefings at undisclosed military locations. A special security detail had been stationed at Fort Davidson for several weeks, then had disappeared as quickly as they'd arrived. What kind of event would require that level of security and secrecy? What could have happened at Fort Davidson in 1979 that was still sensitive enough to detain a civilian contractor 45 years later? As night fell, Rebecca stared out the barred window at the Colorado landscape and realized that finding the badge had been just the beginning. She'd stumbled onto something much larger and more dangerous than a simple case of misplaced military memorabilia. Somewhere out there, someone was very worried about what she might discover next, and they were powerful enough to make her disappear without asking questions. But Rebecca had grown up in her father's auto repair shop, where the first rule was that every problem has a solution if you were patient and methodical enough to find it. Tomorrow, she will start working on the most important repair job of her life, fixing the broken chain of truth that someone had been hiding for 45 years. The investigation was far from over. If anything, it was just getting started. Rebecca woke to the sound of keys rattling in the lock. The fluorescent lights flickered on, revealing a woman in a dark suit standing in the doorway. She was in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back severely, and the kind of authoritative presence that filled the small room. "Miss Martinez, I'm Director Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to talk." Rebecca sat up on the narrow cot, her body stiff from the uncomfortable night. "Am I under arrest?" "No, you're not under arrest, but you are in protective custody while we assess the situation you've created." Walsh pulled out a chair from the small desk and sat down. "I understand you've been quite busy researching matters that don't concern you." "I was doing inventory work. Everything else grew out of trying to understand what I'd found." Walsh opened a tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be a detailed report. "Let's review what you think you know. October 1979, Fort Davidson hosted a presidential security detail. You've identified 5 personnel by name. You believe they were protecting President Carter during some kind of classified operation. How am I doing so far?" Rebecca remained silent. Walsh seemed to have access to everything she'd discovered, so there was no point in denying the obvious. "The problem, Ms. Martinez, is that you're both right and dangerously wrong. There was indeed a special operation at Fort Davidson in October 1979, but it wasn't what you thought it was." Walsh sat down the tablet and leaned forward. "What would you say if I told you that President Carter was never at Fort Davidson? That the entire presidential security detail story was an elaborate cover for something else entirely?" Rebecca felt her carefully constructed theory beginning to crumble. "Then what was the real operation?" "That's classified at levels you don't have access to. But I can tell you this much. The 5 people you identified weren't protecting a president. They were guarding something far more dangerous." Walsh stood up and walked to the barred window. In 1979, the Cold War was at its most paranoid phase. Both superpowers were developing weapons and technologies that pushed the boundaries of international law. Sometimes items would fall into the wrong hands. Sometimes those items needed to be secured quickly and quietly.
What kind of items?
The kind that could start wars if their existence became public knowledge. Walsh turned back to face Rebecca. Fort Davidson was chosen as a temporary storage and analysis facility for certain recovered materials. The 5-person team you identified wasn't military security. They were specialists in handling extremely sensitive foreign technology. Rebecca's mind raced through the implications. "So the badge I found belonged to someone who was guarding stolen Soviet technology?" "Not stolen, recovered, and not necessarily Soviet." Walsh paused. The geopolitical situation in 1979 was more complex than most people realize. There were multiple players, multiple agendas, and multiple secrets worth killing for. The casual mention of killing sent a chill down Rebecca's spine. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. The technology that team was handling in 1979 would still be revolutionary today. The people who originally developed it have never stopped trying to get it back. The people who took it from them have never stopped trying to keep it hidden. Walsh sat back down and pulled out a photograph from her jacket. It showed 5 people in military fatigues standing in front of what looked like Building 47. Rebecca immediately recognized the faces from personnel files she'd glimpsed during her research. From left to right, Captain Jennifer Brennan, Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant Kevin Thompson, Corporal Daniel Sullivan, and Specialist Rachel Chen. 5 of the most talented technology specialists in the U.S. military at the time. Rebecca studied the photograph. Which one owns the badge, PSD 0847? That would be Specialist Chen. She was the team's electronics expert, specializing in reverse engineering foreign communications equipment. What happened to her? Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Officially, Specialist Chen completed her assignment at Fort Davidson and was transferred to another posting. Unofficially, she discovered something about the technology they were analyzing that made her a liability. You mean she was killed? I mean, she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. Something that connected the recovered technology to people who were supposed to be our allies. The implications hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Someone on our side was working with the enemy? Someone very high up in the intelligence community was feeding information to foreign contacts. Chen stumbled onto evidence of the betrayal during her analysis work. She tried to report it through proper channels. Walsh pulled out another photograph, this one showing a burned-out car on a remote highway. 3 days after Chen filed her report, she died in what appeared to be a single vehicle accident on a mountain road outside Denver. Her body was burned beyond recognition. The official investigation concluded she fell asleep at the wheel. Rebecca stared at the photograph, trying to process what she was hearing. But you don't think it was an accident. I think Rachel Chen was murdered to protect a secret that could have brought down several high-ranking officials and compromised ongoing intelligence operations. Her personal effects were collected from Fort Davidson and stored away, presumably forever. Until I found them. Until you found them. Walsh leaned back in her chair. Which brings us to our current problem. The people who arranged Chen's death are still alive. Some of them are still in positions of power, and they're very concerned about what might happen if Chen's evidence surfaces after all these years. Rebecca felt a wave of fear wash over her. That's why you're holding me here. We're holding you here because 3 hours after Major Harrison reported your research activities, we intercepted communications suggesting that certain parties were planning to arrange another accident. This time involving a civilian contractor who'd been asking too many questions. The room felt suddenly cold. Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. So what happens now? That depends entirely on you. Walsh opened her tablet again and pulled out what appeared to be a legal document. We have 2 options. Option 1, you sign an expanded non-disclosure agreement, accept a generous severance package, and relocate to a city of your choosing under a new identity. You live a quiet life and never speak of any of this again.
And option 2? Walsh's expression grew serious. Option 2, you help us finish what Rachel Chen started. You use your analytical skills to help us finally expose the truth about what happened in 1979 and bring the people responsible to justice. Rebecca stared at the tablet screen, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what she was being asked to choose. If I choose option 2, what are the chances I survive long enough to see justice done? Honestly, I don't know. The people we're dealing with have been covering their tracks for 45 years. They have resources, connections, and a proven willingness to kill to protect their secrets. Walsh closed the tablet. But I can tell you this, Rachel Chen's evidence is still out there, hidden but recoverable. If we can find it and verify it, we can finally expose a conspiracy that goes all the way to the highest levels of government. Why me? Why not use trained investigators or intelligence agents? Because you're not part of the system. You don't have loyalties or obligations that could be compromised. And frankly, you've already proven you have the skills to uncover information that others missed. Walsh stood up. I'm going to give you some time to think about this. But understand that doing nothing isn't really an option anymore. Too many people know you've been asking questions. The only way to guarantee your safety is to either disappear completely or expose the truth so thoroughly that silencing you becomes pointless. After Walsh left, Rebecca sat alone in the small room, staring at the photograph of Rachel Chen and her team. 5 young military specialists who thought they were serving their country, unaware that they were being manipulated by people with hidden agendas. She thought about Chen discovering evidence of betrayal, trying to do the right thing by reporting it through proper channels, only to be murdered for her integrity. She thought about the other 4 team members who probably never knew what their colleague had uncovered or why she died. Rebecca had always prided herself on being methodical, on approaching problems logically and systematically. But this wasn't a simple inventory discrepancy or a missing serial number. This was about corruption at the highest levels of government, about murders committed to protect state secrets, about conspiracies that had been festering for decades. The smart choice was obvious. Take the money, accept the new identity, and disappear. Live a quiet life somewhere far from Colorado and never think about Fort Davenport again. But as Rebecca stared at Rachel Chen's face in the photograph, she realized she couldn't live with herself if she chose safety over justice. Chen had died trying to expose the truth. The least Rebecca could do was finish what the young specialist had started. When Walsh returned 2 hours later, Rebecca had made her decision. "I'll help you find Chen's evidence," she said quietly, "but I want to know everything. No more half-truths, no more classified restrictions. If I'm risking my life for this, I need to understand exactly what I'm fighting for." Walsh nodded approvingly. "Fair enough. But once I tell you the full story, there's no going back. You'll know things that will make you a target for the rest of your life. I'm already a target." "True." Walsh sat down and opened her tablet. "Let me tell you about Project Nightfall and why Rachel Chen had to die to keep it secret." Director Walsh pulled out the series of classified documents on her tablet, each one stamped with security classifications Rebecca had never seen before. Project Nightfall began in September 1979, 3 weeks before the team arrived at Fort Davenport. What I'm about to show you has been buried in the deepest vaults of the intelligence community for over 4 decades. The first document was an intelligence briefing from the CIA, dated September 12, 1979. Rebecca could see fragments through the heavy redaction. Unconfirmed reports of advanced propulsion technology, recovered from crash site, foreign origin uncertain, requires immediate analysis. "A craft went down in the Nevada desert," Walsh explained. "Not a plane, not a helicopter. Something that defied conventional understanding of aerodynamics and propulsion. The recovery team found technology that was decades ahead of our arsenal." Rebecca studied the blurry photographs attached to the briefing. They showed twisted metal fragments with unusual geometric patterns, components that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality. "You're talking about a UFO. I'm talking about technology of unknown origin that posed both an unprecedented opportunity and an existential threat to national security." Walsh swiped to the next document. The decision was made to transport the recovered materials to Fort Davenport for analysis by our most skilled specialists. The next series of photos showed the 5-person team Rebecca had identified, but now she could see them in a different context. They weren't just military personnel. They were standing next to equipment she'd never seen before, holding instruments that looked decades ahead of 1979 technology. Captain Brennan was our metallurgy expert, Walsh continued. She specialized in analyzing unknown alloys and composite materials. Sergeant Rodriguez was a propulsion engineer who'd worked on classified aircraft projects. Staff Sergeant Thompson handled electromagnetic phenomena. Corporal Sullivan was our computer systems analyst. And Rachel Chen? Chen was the most gifted electronics engineer of her generation. She could reverse engineer any communication or control system, no matter how advanced or alien its design might be. Walsh pulled up Chen's personnel file, showing a young woman with intense, intelligent eyes. Chen made breakthrough after breakthrough during the first 2 weeks of analysis. She figured out how their communication systems worked, how they generated power, even how they achieved what appeared to be gravity manipulation. Rebecca felt a chill of understanding. She cracked their technology. More than that, she discovered that the craft wasn't an accident. The craft had been shot down by experimental weapons that officially didn't exist. Weapons that had been developed in a joint program between the US and Soviet Union. The implications hit Rebecca like a thunderbolt. We were working with the Soviets during the Cold War? A small group of officials on both sides had been secretly collaborating for years, sharing technology and intelligence while their respective governments remained officially hostile. They called themselves the Prometheus Group, representatives from both superpowers who believed that humanity's survival depended on cooperation rather than conflict. Walsh showed Rebecca another document, this one bearing both American and Soviet official seals. The Prometheus Group had been monitoring the unknown craft for months. When diplomatic attempts to make contact failed, they made the decision to bring it down and study its technology. But Rebecca struggled to find words. That's their first contact with an alien civilization, and they decided to attack it? They decided that acquiring advanced technology was more important than peaceful contact. The craft's inhabitants, 3 beings according to the recovery reports, were killed in the crash. Their bodies were taken to a separate facility for study.
Rebecca felt sick. The magnitude of what she was learning was overwhelming. Humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence had resulted in murder and theft, carried out by a secret conspiracy that spanned enemy nations. Chen discovered all of this during her analysis work, Welsh continued. She found communication logs between the craft and others of its kind, warning them away from Earth. She found evidence that the beings had been trying to establish peaceful contact through official channels, only to be shot down by the very people they were trying to reach. So she tried to expose it. Chen was horrified by what she learned. She assembled a comprehensive report documenting the conspiracy, the murders, and the technology theft. She included copies of the communication logs, technical specifications, and evidence of the joint US-Soviet operation. Walsh pulled up a scan of Chen's original report. Even heavily redacted, Rebecca could see the meticulous detail, the careful documentation of evidence. She filed it through military intelligence channels, believing she was doing her patriotic duty. But someone in those channels was part of the conspiracy. Colonel Marcus Webb, Chen's commanding officer, was one of the founding members of the Prometheus Group. Her report landed directly on his desk. Walsh showed Rebecca a photograph of Webb, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with cold, calculating eyes. Webb realized immediately that Chen had uncovered enough evidence to expose the entire operation. He couldn't simply suppress the report because Chen had been thorough enough to document everything, including her attempts to report through proper channels. So he had her killed. Webb arranged for Chen to receive emergency leave to visit her supposedly dying grandmother in Denver. On the drive back to Fort Davenport, her car went off the road and burned. The official investigation was cursory. Webb made sure of that. Rebecca stared at the accident photos Walsh had shown her earlier, now understanding the true horror of what had happened. What about the other team members? Did they know what Chen had discovered? That's where it gets complicated. Walsh pulled up files on the other 4 specialists. Brennan, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Sullivan knew something was wrong when Chen died, but they didn't know exactly what she'd uncovered. Webb kept them isolated, told them the project was being transferred to another facility. Where are they now?
Walsh's expression grew grim. Captain Brennan died in a training accident 6 months later. Sergeant Rodriguez suffered a fatal heart attack at age 32. Staff Sergeant Thompson was killed in a mugging that the police never solved. Rebecca felt the pattern emerging with growing horror. They were all murdered. All except Daniel Sullivan. He was the smartest of the group. When his colleagues started dying, he realized what was happening and disappeared. Went underground, changed his identity, stayed hidden. Is he still alive? We believe so. Sullivan is the only surviving witness to Project Nightfall, and he's been running for 45 years. If we can find him, he might be able to lead us to Chen's hidden evidence. Walsh closed the tablet and looked directly at Rebecca. That's why we need you. Sullivan doesn't trust anyone connected to the government or military, but a civilian contractor who stumbled onto this by accident, someone with no official connections, he might be willing to make contact. Rebecca's mind was reeling from everything she'd learned. You want me to find a man who's been successfully hiding from the government for 4 decades? We want you to find the one person who can help us expose the truth about First Contact, about the murders that covered it up, and about the conspiracy that's been suppressing humanity's greatest discovery for nearly half a century. Walsh stood up and walked to the window. The technology Chen analyzed could have revolutionized human civilization. Clean energy, space travel, communication systems beyond our current imagination. Instead, it's been locked away in underground vaults while the Prometheus group has slowly integrated selected pieces into black-budget projects. They've been using alien technology in secret for decades. Stealth aircraft, satellite systems, communication networks. Much of our advanced military technology has its roots in what was recovered from that crash. Meanwhile, the public remains ignorant of humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Rebecca thought about the implications. How many people are part of this conspiracy now? That's what we're trying to determine. The original Prometheus group was small, maybe 20 people on each side. But over the years, more officials have been brought in, more scientists and engineers have worked on projects derived from alien technology. The conspiracy has grown and evolved. Walsh turned back to face Rebecca. Some of the most powerful people in government and industry today owe their positions to knowledge gained from Project Nightfall. They'll do anything to prevent the truth from coming out, including killing a civilian contractor who found an old badge. Including that. Walsh pulled out a secure phone. But they made a mistake when they decided to threaten you instead of simply making you disappear. It gave us the opportunity to make contact, to offer you protection in exchange for your help. Rebecca stood up, pacing the small room as she tried to process everything. Let's say I agree to help you find Sullivan. What makes you think he'll trust me any more than he'd trust you? Because you found Chen's badge through legitimate means, not through government intelligence gathering. Because you've been asking the right questions for the right reasons. And because Sullivan has been waiting 45 years for someone like you to come along. Walsh showed Rebecca one final document. A newspaper clipping from 2018 about a software engineer in Portland who'd anonymously donated a large sum of money to a foundation supporting government transparency. We think this might be Sullivan. Same age, similar background, and the donation came with a note saying it was in memory of colleagues who died trying to tell the truth.
Rebecca studied the article. The donor's name was listed as David Stone, but the description of his background seemed to match what she knew about Daniel Sullivan. You want me to go to Portland and try to make contact? We want you to go to Portland and convince a man who spent half his life in hiding that it's finally safe to come forward with the truth. Rebecca sat back down, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was being asked to do. She thought about Rachel Chen, brilliant and idealistic, murdered for trying to expose the truth. She thought about the other team members, eliminated one by one to protect a conspiracy that had robbed humanity of its greatest discovery. If I do this, Rebecca said finally, and if we succeed in exposing Project Nightfall, what happens then? Do we tell the world that First Contact happened 45 years ago and ended in murder? Walsh was quiet for a long moment. We tell the world that its governments have been lying about one of the most important events in human history. We reveal that advanced technology has been suppressed to maintain the power structure of a select few. And we honor the memory of 5 young people who died because they believed truth was more important than secrecy. Rebecca looked at the photograph of Chen's team one more time, seeing them now not as nameless faces from the past, but as real people who'd been caught up in something far bigger than they could have imagined. When do we leave for Portland? 3 days later, Rebecca found herself walking through Pioneer Courthouse Square in downtown Portland, Oregon. The transition from military detention to undercover operation had been surreal. Director Walsh had provided her with a new identity, credit cards, and a cover story about being a freelance journalist researching government transparency issues. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Rebecca would approach David Stone, the man they believed was Daniel Sullivan, under the pretense of researching a story about military whistleblowers. If Stone was indeed Sullivan, certain key phrases would trigger his recognition that she knew about Project Nightfall. Rebecca had memorized every detail of Sullivan's original personnel file, every fact about his time at Fort Davidson, and, crucially, the specific technical specifications of the alien technology that only someone who'd worked on the project would know. Stone's software company, Cascade Digital Solutions, occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District. According to Walsh's intelligence, Stone kept a low profile but had built a successful business creating encryption software for privacy-conscious clients. Rebecca entered the building's lobby and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The offices of Cascade Digital were surprisingly modest, a small reception area with sleek but understated furniture, and beyond it what appeared to be an open workspace where a handful of programmers worked quietly at their computers. The receptionist, a young woman with purple-streaked hair and multiple piercings, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you? I'm hoping to speak with David Stone about a freelance article I'm working on. I know he's busy, but it would just take a few minutes." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I think he'll want to hear what I have to say. It's about government transparency and people who've risked their careers to expose the truth." The receptionist studied Rebecca's face, apparently trying to gauge her legitimacy. "Let me see if he's available." 5 minutes later, Rebecca was ushered into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. The man behind the desk was in his mid-60s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. He was clearly fit for his age, with the kind of alertness that suggested he'd spent decades watching for potential threats. "Miss Carter, I understand you're a journalist working on a story about government whistleblowers." His voice was calm but cautious. Rebecca had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but actually sitting across from the man who might be humanity's last link to the truth about first contact made her heart race. "That's right. I'm particularly interested in people who tried to expose wrongdoing in the late 1970s, especially those who faced retaliation for their efforts." Stone's expression didn't change, but Rebecca noticed his hands tense slightly on the desk. "That's a very specific time frame. What kind of wrongdoing are you referring to?" This was the moment of truth. Rebecca took a deep breath and spoke the words Walsh had coached her to say. "I'm researching incidents involving the suppression of technological discoveries, particularly cases where whistleblowers uncovered evidence of joint operations between supposed enemy nations." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Stone's face went completely pale, and his hand moved instinctively toward what I assumed was a panic button under his desk. For a long moment, they stared at each other in complete silence. "Who sent you?" he whispered finally. "Someone who believes that Rachel Chen deserves justice." Stone closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Rebecca saw decades of fear and Cain. "How do you know that name?" "Because I found her badged in a storage box at Fort Davidson, badge number PSD-0847. Stone stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "They told me she died in a car accident."
We know she was murdered to prevent her from exposing Project Nightfall. The stone turned around sharply. We? Who exactly is we? Rebecca realized she'd made a mistake by revealing she wasn't working alone. Stone's survival instincts had kept him alive for 45 years, and her slip-up had triggered all his alarm bells. I'm working with people who want to expose the truth about what happened in 1979. People who believe the world deserves to know about first contact.
Stone laughed bitterly. First contact? Is that what they're calling it now? He walked back to his desk and pressed a button on his computer. The office windows immediately tinted dark, and Rebecca heard the subtle hum of what she assumed was an electronic countermeasure system. You want to know about first contact? Stone's voice was filled with decades of suppressed anger. Let me tell you what really happened at Fort Davidson. He opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick folder. I've been carrying this around for 45 years, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The folder contained photographs Rebecca had never seen before, clear, detailed images of the recovered alien technology. Unlike the blurry intelligence photos Walsh had shown her, these revealed the incredible sophistication of the craft's construction. Rachel wasn't just analyzing their communication systems, Stone said, spreading the photos across his desk. She was talking to them. What do you mean, talking to them? The crash didn't kill all the occupants immediately. One of them survived for 3 days after the recovery team brought the wreckage to Fort Davidson. Rachel figured out how to interface with their neural communication system. Stoney pulled out an audio recording device that looked decades ahead of 1979 technology. She made recordings of their conversations. Want to hear what humanity's first words with an alien intelligence actually sounded like? Rebecca nodded, unable to speak. Stone pressed a button, and the room filled with an otherworldly sound. Not quite music, not quite speech, but something that seemed to communicate directly with the listener's consciousness. Then, clear as day, they heard Rachel Chen's voice. "Can you understand me? We're trying to help you." The alien response came not as words, but as images that somehow formed in Rebecca's mind. Pictures of a dying planet, of refugees seeking new homes among the stars, of peaceful contact missions to young civilizations. "My name is Rachel, Rachel Chen. Can you tell me your name?" More images flooded Rebecca's consciousness, concepts that human language couldn't adequately express, but that conveyed identity, purpose, and overwhelming sadness. Stone stopped the recording. The being's name translates roughly to Keeper of Stories. It was part of a group trying to establish contact with emerging civilizations, to share knowledge and prevent the kind of mistakes that had destroyed their own world. Rebecca was crying without realizing it, overwhelmed by the beauty and tragedy of what she just experienced. They were trying to help us. They came in peace, offering to share technology that could have solved climate change, ended energy scarcity, and even extended human lifespan. And we shot them down because a group of paranoid officials decided that stealing their technology was safer than accepting their friendship. Stone pulled out more recordings. Rachel documented everything: the being's final words, the location of their main ship, even the communication protocols for contacting others of their kind. She was going to give humanity a second chance at first contact. But Colonel Webb stopped her. Webb and his Prometheus group murdered the last survivor, destroyed most of the evidence, and killed anyone who knew the truth. But Rachel was smarter than they gave her credit for. She hid copies of everything before filing her official report. Stone opened another drawer and pulled out what appeared to be an advanced storage device, smaller than a thumb drive, but with an alien design. This contains the complete record of humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, communication logs, technical specifications, even the coordinates of their home fleet. Rebecca stared at the device, realizing she was looking at potentially the most important object in human history. "Why haven't you released this information?" "Because I've seen what they do to people who try to expose the truth. Rachel, Jennifer, Miguel, Kevin, they all died because they believed justice was more important than survival." Stone's voice broke slightly. "I've been a coward for 45 years, protecting this information while the world remains ignorant of its greatest opportunity. But you're still alive. That means you can still make their sacrifice count for something." Stone was quiet for a long moment, staring at the alien device. The being told Rachel that their people would wait for humanity to be ready for peaceful contact. "They've been watching us, hoping we'd evolve beyond the violence and paranoia that characterized our first meeting. How long will they wait?" According to the communication logs, they review each species every 50 of their years, which corresponds to about 47 Earth years. The next review is scheduled for 2026. Rebecca felt a chill of understanding. If we don't make contact by then, they'll classify humanity as a hostile species and quarantine our solar system. No more contact attempts, no more opportunities for peaceful exchange. We'll be left to solve our problems alone, or destroy ourselves trying. Stone stood up and walked to a wall safe hidden behind a painting. From it, he withdrew several more storage devices and a thick notebook filled with Rachel Chen's handwriting. "I've spent 45 years preparing for this moment," he said, placing the items on his desk. "Every piece of evidence, every recording, every technical specification that Rachel documented, it's all here. What changed your mind about coming forward?" Stone smiled sadly. "Rachel made me promise something before she filed her report. She made me swear that if anything happened to her, I would make sure the truth eventually came out. I've been waiting for someone I could trust to help me honor that promise." "And you trust me?" "You found her badge through honest work, not through espionage or manipulation. You've been asking questions because you believe in the truth, not because someone ordered you to. That's exactly the kind of person Rachel would have wanted to complete her mission." Stone began packing the evidence into a briefcase. "But I need you to understand what you're signing up for. The Prometheus Group still exists, and they still have the power to eliminate threats. Once we go public with this information, we'll both be marked for death." Rebecca thought about everything she'd learned, about the magnitude of what they were proposing to reveal to the world. What about Director Walsh and her people? Won't they protect us? Stone's expression grew dark. "Walsh is using you, just like Webb used Rachel. The Defense Intelligence Agency isn't interested in exposing the truth. They want to control it. Once they have this evidence, you'll become a liability, just like everyone who's known too much." Rebecca felt the ground shifting beneath her again. "Then who can we trust?" "No one in the government, no one in the military, no one with official authority." Stone closed the briefcase and looked directly at her. "We're going to have to expose this ourselves, publicly and simultaneously, in a way that makes it impossible to suppress or discredit." "How?" Stone smiled for the first time since she'd entered his office. Rachel wasn't just brilliant at analyzing alien technology. She was also a gifted computer programmer who created some very sophisticated information distribution systems, systems that have been waiting 45 years for someone to activate them. He pulled out a final device, this one clearly of human origin, but far more advanced than anything Rebecca had seen before. This is Rachel's insurance policy, a dead man switch connected to data repositories all over the world. Once activated, it will simultaneously release everything to journalists, scientists, and government officials on every continent. The whole world will know at once. The whole world will know at once. Stone's expression grew serious. "But once we trigger this system, there's no going back. We'll have maybe 12 hours before the Prometheus Group realizes what's happening and comes for us." Rebecca stared at the device, understanding that pressing its activation button would change human history forever. 12 hours to expose 45 years of lies. 12 hours to give humanity one last chance at the future Rachel Chen died trying to secure. Stone held out the device to her. The choice is yours, Miss Martinez, but choose quickly, because I have reason to believe that Director Walsh is already on her way to Portland. Rebecca stared at the activation device in Stone's outstretched hand, her mind racing through the implications of what they were about to do. Once pressed, that button would irreversibly change human civilization's understanding of its place in the universe. "How long do we have before Walsh arrives?" she asked, taking the device. Stone glanced at his computer screen, which was displaying what appeared to be flight tracking information. Her plane landed 20 minutes ago. Assuming she has ground transportation waiting, maybe 30 minutes before they reach this building. Rebecca felt her pulse accelerate. They'll try to stop us. They'll do more than try. Walsh has authorization to use any means necessary to protect classified information. Stone was rapidly packing documents and storage devices into multiple briefcases. But Rachel's distribution system was designed to be unstoppable once activated. Even if they kill us in the next hour, the truth will still reach the world. Stone handed Rebecca one of the briefcases. These contain backup copies of everything. If we get separated, find a way to get this to investigative journalists. Focus on reporters who've already challenged government secrecy. They'll be more likely to believe the evidence. Rebecca opened the briefcase briefly, seeing dozens of storage devices, photographs, and handwritten notes in Chen's careful script. How do we know this distribution system will actually work after 45 years? Because I've been maintaining it. Stone led her toward a back exit she hadn't noticed before. Every few years, I've updated the technology, expanded the network, and added new recipients. There are currently over 3,000 journalists, scientists, and government officials in 47 countries who will simultaneously receive the complete evidence package. They emerged into a service corridor that connected to the building's rear stairwell. Stone moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd planned escape routes for decades. The activation signal will also trigger automatic uploads to secure servers in multiple countries. WikiLeaks, major newspapers, scientific journals, social media platforms, everything will go live simultaneously. They reached the ground floor and Stone paused at the exit door, listening carefully for sounds from outside. Rachel was brilliant. She understood that the only way to prevent suppression was to make the information so widespread that no government or conspiracy could contain it. Rebecca gripped the activation device tighter. What happens to the alien technology that's been hidden for 45 years? The government facilities? The black projects? That's out of our hands. Once the world knows the truth, there will be massive pressure for transparency. Some countries might release their research, others might try to maintain secrecy, but the genie will be out of the bottle. Stone opened the door cautiously, scanning the alley behind the building. The most important thing is that humanity will finally know we're not alone, and that we were offered a chance at peaceful contact. Maybe knowing how badly we failed the first time will help us do better if we get another opportunity. They emerged into the alley, moving quickly toward where Stone had parked a nondescript sedan. Rebecca was about to ask about their destination when she heard the sound of helicopters approaching from the east. "They're moving faster than I expected," Stone muttered, fumbling with his car keys. "We need to activate the system now before they can jam communications in this area." Rebecca looked down at the device in her hands. It was surprisingly simple, just a single button surrounded by what appeared to be an alien script that seemed to shift and change as she looked at it. "Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." Stone paused with his hand on the car door. "I've had 45 years to think about it. Every day, I've wondered what Rachel would want me to do. Every day, I've lived with the knowledge that humanity is facing a deadline for peaceful contact, and we're running out of time." The helicopter sounds were getting louder, and Rebecca could see black SUVs turning into the street at both ends of the alley. They were out of time for philosophical discussions. "For Rachel," she said, and pressed the button. The device immediately began emitting a soft, harmonious tone that seemed to resonate with something deep in Rebecca's consciousness.
The alien script around the button glowed briefly, then faded to black. "It's done," Stone said simply. "Rachel's evidence is now being transmitted to every major news organization and government facility in the world." The first SUV reached their end of the alley, and armed figures in tactical gear began pouring out. Rebecca recognized Director Walsh among them, her face grim with determination. "Daniel Sullivan," Walsh called out, her voice amplified by a megaphone. "Step away from the vehicle and surrender the classified materials." Stone smiled sadly. "Too late, Director. The materials aren't classified anymore." Walsh's expression shifted as she apparently received communication through her earpiece. Her face went pale as she processed whatever information she was being given. "You have no idea what you've done," she shouted. "This isn't just about government secrecy. This is about preventing panic, maintaining stability. The world isn't ready for this information." Rebecca found her voice. "The world has been ready for 45 years. You just never gave it the chance." More vehicles were arriving now, filling both ends of the alley. Rebecca counted at least 20 armed personnel, with more helicopters circling overhead. The government was clearly taking this very seriously. Stone's phone began buzzing with notifications, news alerts from around the world as Rachel's evidence package began reaching its recipients. He glanced at the screen and smiled. BBC News: Explosive evidence of government UFO cover-up released. CNN: Leaked documents suggest first contact occurred in 1979. The Guardian: Whistleblower claims alien technology hidden for decades. Walsh was receiving more urgent communications, her team clearly struggling to coordinate a response to the global information release. "It's not too late to contain this," she called out desperately. "We can claim it's disinformation, foreign propaganda. With technical specifications that can be verified, with audio recordings of alien communication, with 45 years of corroborating evidence from multiple sources." Rebecca watched as Walsh's team seemed to be receiving conflicting orders. Some were maintaining their positions, others were backing away, apparently being recalled to deal with the wider crisis of global information release. Stone's phone buzzed again. Twitter is trending #FirstContact worldwide. Facebook is overwhelmed with shares of the document packages. Scientists at CERN are already analyzing the technical specifications and confirming they describe technology beyond current human capabilities. The helicopters overhead began pulling back, and several of the SUVs were receiving orders to withdraw. Walsh looked increasingly isolated as her backup disappeared. "This is far from over," she warned them. "There are aspects of this situation you don't understand, consequences you haven't considered." "Then explain them," Rebecca challenged. "The truth is out there now. What could be worse than the lies you've been protecting?" Walsh was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing her options. Finally, she approached them slowly, her weapon lowered. "The crash in 1979 wasn't an isolated incident," she said quietly. "It was part of an ongoing conflict between different alien factions. Some want peaceful contact with humanity. Others view us as a threat that needs to be eliminated." Rebecca felt a chill of new understanding. "You mean there are hostile aliens?" "The beings that crashed at Fort Davidson were refugees, fleeing from a more aggressive species that's been expanding through this sector of the galaxy. By shooting down their craft, the Prometheus group inadvertently sent a signal that humanity had sided with their enemies." Stone's expression grew troubled. "Rachel never mentioned anything about alien conflicts." "Because the dying being didn't want to frighten her with information about the larger war. It focused on the peaceful contact protocols, hoping humanity could still choose the right side." Walsh moved closer, her team maintaining their distance. "For 45 years, we've been trying to develop defenses based on the recovered technology, preparing for the possibility that the hostile faction might decide to eliminate the threat we represent." "By suppressing evidence of peaceful contact?" Rebecca asked. "By murdering the people who wanted to pursue diplomacy?"
By buying time to understand the situation and develop appropriate responses. Walsh's voice carried decades of exhaustion. You think we wanted to keep this secret? You think we enjoyed building weapons instead of pursuing peaceful contact? Stone was reading more updates on his phone. Major governments are calling emergency sessions. The UN is convening an immediate meeting on extraterrestrial contact protocols. Scientists worldwide are demanding access to the suppressed technology research. And now the world knows that first contact was possible, Rebecca said to Walsh. Maybe this time humanity can choose a different path. Walsh nodded slowly. Maybe. The evidence you've released includes the peaceful contact protocols. If world leaders are wise enough to use them, we might still have a chance at the alliance the original visitors were offering. What about the hostile aliens? How long do we have? According to our analysis of the intercepted communications, the aggressive faction was planning to make a decision about humanity by 2026. If we can establish peaceful contact with the refugee fleet before then, we might be able to join the alliance against the aggressors. Stone looked up from his phone. The Keeper of Stories told Rachel that their people would wait for humanity to mature. Maybe having the truth finally exposed is exactly the kind of maturity they were looking for. Rebecca felt a strange sense of completion as she watched news alerts flooding in from around the world. Within hours, the biggest secret in human history had been exposed, and humanity was finally grappling with its true place in a universe filled with both friends and enemies. "What happens now?" she asked. Walsh holstered her weapon completely. "Now we deal with the consequences of 45 years of secrecy and lies. Now we hope that humanity is wise enough to learn from its mistakes and choose cooperation over conflict." Stone was scrolling through responses from the scientific community. Researchers are already calling for international cooperation to analyze the technical specifications. Some are proposing immediate attempts to use the communication protocols to contact the peaceful aliens. And some world leaders are probably planning to weaponize whatever technology they can access, Walsh added grimly. The next few months will determine whether exposing the truth was humanity's salvation or the beginning of its downfall. Rebecca looked up at the helicopters withdrawing in the distance, then at the alien device in her hands that had just changed the course of human history. Rachel Chen died believing that truth was more important than safety. I think she would be proud that her evidence finally reached the world. "The whole world is watching now," Stone said, closing his phone. "In 45 years, we went from murdering the first peaceful aliens we encountered to potentially joining an interstellar alliance. Not bad for a species that was once too paranoid to accept help when it was offered." As sirens wailed in the distance and news helicopters began circling overhead, Rebecca realized that her simple inventory job at Fort Davenport had led to something no one could have imagined. A forgotten badge in a dusty storage box had become the key to unlocking humanity's greatest secret. The truth was finally free, and whatever came next, the world would face it with open eyes. For the first time in 45 years, humanity had a real chance at the future Rachel Chen had died trying to give them. The age of secrets was over. The age of contact was about to begin. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the United Nations Assembly Hall in New York, watching delegates from 193 nations debate humanity's response to what the media had dubbed the Martinez revelations. The world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The initial global reaction had been chaotic. Stock markets crashed as investors grappled with the implications of suppressed alien technology. Religious leaders struggled to reconcile their teachings with evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. Conspiracy theorists found themselves vindicated, while governments worldwide faced unprecedented demands for transparency. But gradually, something remarkable had emerged from the chaos: unprecedented international cooperation. The threat of hostile aliens had forced humanity to set aside petty territorial disputes and work together on a scale never before achieved. Dr. Sarah Kim, a quantum physicist from Seoul, had led the international team analyzing Rachel Chen's technical specifications.
Standing at the podium now, she was presenting their findings to the assembled delegates. The propulsion technology described in the recovered documents operates on principles we're only beginning to understand, Dr. Kim explained. But preliminary analysis suggests it could revolutionize space travel, making interstellar journeys possible within human lifetimes. Rebecca watched from the observer gallery as delegates leaned forward, hungry for details about technology that could transform civilization. The communication protocols had proven even more significant. Teams of linguists and computer scientists had successfully established preliminary contact with what they believed was the peaceful alien fleet. Rebecca smiled, thinking about how Rachel Chen would have reacted to seeing a Chinese ambassador named Chen helping to complete her work. The universe had its own sense of poetry. Daniel Stone had become something of a reluctant celebrity, testifying before congressional committees and parliamentary inquiries around the world. His software company had been transformed into a foundation dedicated to preserving and analyzing the evidence from Project Nightfall. Most importantly, he'd finally been able to honor his promise to Rachel Chen. The military implications had been staggering. Analysis of 45 years of black-budget projects revealed that much of humanity's advanced technology, from stealth aircraft to satellite communication systems, had been derived from the crashed alien vessel. The revelation had sparked fierce debates about intellectual property rights and the ethics of reverse engineering stolen technology. Director Walsh had surprisingly become an ally in the transparency movement. Freed from the burden of maintaining impossible secrets, she'd testified extensively about the Prometheus Group's activities and helped expose the full extent of the cover-up. Many of the surviving conspirators are now facing international tribunals for crimes against humanity. The evidence suggests that our window for peaceful contact may be narrower than we initially believed, Dr. Kim continued her presentation. Recent transmissions indicate increased activity from the hostile faction, possibly in response to our newfound awareness of the galactic conflict. Rebecca felt a familiar chill at the reminder that humanity's situation remains precarious. Senator Rodriguez from Mexico stood to speak. What concrete steps can we take to demonstrate humanity's commitment to peaceful cooperation? How do we prove we've evolved beyond the violence that characterized our first contact? The question hung in the air as delegates contemplated humanity's next move. The peaceful aliens had provided a list of criteria for species seeking to join their alliance: demonstration of global cooperation, commitment to non-aggression, and willingness to share resources and knowledge for the common good. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Tokyo Institute of Technology had been leading the effort to meet these criteria. We propose the establishment of a unified Earth Defense and Diplomacy Initiative, she announced, a truly international organization dedicated to peaceful space exploration and defense against hostile threats.
The proposal represented something unprecedented in human history: genuine global governance focused on humanity's collective survival rather than national interests. Rebecca watched as delegates from historically antagonistic nations nodded in agreement, united by the knowledge that their species faced external threats that made their earthly conflicts seem petty. The breakthrough had come 3 months ago when Russian and American scientists, working together for the first time since the Cold War, had successfully activated one of the alien communication devices. The first message from the peaceful fleet had been simple but profound. We have been waiting. Are you ready to choose cooperation? President Martinez of the Philippines stood to address the assembly. The keeper of stories died believing that humanity could evolve beyond its violent impulses. We have an opportunity to prove that faith was justified. Rebecca thought about the audio recordings of Rachel Chen's conversations with the dying alien. The keeper of stories had shared visions of worlds where different species worked together to solve cosmic challenges, where technology was used to preserve life rather than destroy it. Those visions were now guiding humanity's first steps into galactic civilization. The vote on the Earth Defense and Diplomacy Initiative was unanimous, the first time in UN history that all 193 member nations had agreed on anything. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she watched human representatives from every corner of the planet commit to working together for their species' survival. After the session, Rebecca found herself in Central Park, walking the same paths where she'd nervously prepared for her approach to Stone 6 months earlier. So much had changed since that day in Portland when they'd activated Rachel's distribution system. Her phone buzzed with a message from Stone, who was now in Geneva helping coordinate the International Technology Sharing Program. The first prototype communications array goes online tomorrow. We'll finally be able to have real-time conversations with our new allies. Rebecca smiled, remembering her father's auto repair shop in Phoenix, where she'd learned that every problem had a solution if you were patient and methodical enough to find it. Humanity's biggest problem, its isolation in a dangerous universe, was finally being solved through the same principles of careful investigation and persistent effort. The memorial to Rachel Chen and her team had been unveiled the previous month at Fort Davidson, which had been transformed into an international research facility. Rebecca had spoken at the dedication, honoring 5 young people who died because they believed truth was more important than convenient lies. But perhaps the most meaningful change had been in humanity's perspective on itself. For the first time in history, people around the world truly understood that they were part of something larger than their individual nations or cultures. They were representatives of their species in a universe filled with both wonders and dangers. The hostile aliens remained a threat, but no longer an unknown one. International teams were working around the clock to develop defenses based on the recovered technology, while diplomats prepared for the possibility of formal contact with the peaceful alliance. Humanity was finally taking control of its cosmic destiny. Rebecca's phone buzzed again with breaking news alerts. The first images from the new Deep Space Monitoring Array had detected what appeared to be a massive fleet approaching the outer edge of the solar system. The peaceful aliens were coming home. As Rebecca watched the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and crimson, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought humanity to this moment. A simple inventory job had become the catalyst for the most important transformation in human history. Tomorrow, representatives of Earth would speak directly with an advanced alien civilization for the first time. Not as victims of a tragic misunderstanding, but as potential partners in a galactic alliance dedicated to peace and progress. Rachel Chen's sacrifice had finally achieved its purpose. Humanity was ready to take its place among the stars, guided by the values of truth, cooperation, and hope that had driven a young electronics specialist to risk everything for justice. The universe was vast and dangerous, filled with species that had chosen different paths through the cosmos. But for the first time in 45 years, humanity knew where it stood and what it was fighting for. The age of ignorance and isolation was ending. The age of contact, cooperation, and cosmic citizenship had begun. And somewhere among the approaching ships, Rebecca liked to think the spirit of Rachel Chen was finally coming home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.